This Parsha Podcast is dedicated in loving memory and leilui nishmas Aharon Ben Yosef, who was the father of our dear friend Josh Hedaya. Aharon Ben Yosef's yahrzeit is the 11th of Kislev, the day that this episode will be released. May his soul be elevated in heaven. It's been a busy week, not just here at the Torch Center, but in the world. As you know, the world's changing fast. When we spoke last week, Bashar al-Assad was still the ruler of Syria. In fact, the Assad family have been ruling Syria for more than 50 years. And this family and this regime has been some of the most violent and ruthless of our enemies. And just like that, poof, overnight, he is overthrown. Of course, we don't know if this is good news or bad news. We don't know who's going to rule Syria going forward, if they're better or worse for us. But it is something, I think, remarkable about how our enemies seem to be dropping like flies. You know, Hamas, all their leaders are done. Hezbollah, Iran is weakened. Syria completely dismantled almost overnight. And the Israelis have been taking advantage of the fog of war. They've done hundreds and hundreds of strikes and destroyed all sorts of weapons facilities and weapons caches and naval and air force assets. Whoever is going to be the next leaders of Syria is severely kneecapped. We're hearing rumblings of a hostage deal. So it seems like there's some good news on the horizon after a very painful 14 months. We hope that this nightmare is going to come to an end and we'll have a positive and bright future coming forward. I was always wondering what's happening in Syria. Like, well, why is it so quiet? You're Lebanon and Iran and the Iraqi militias and the Houthis. Why is there nothing coming from Syria? Maybe this is the answer. They were too embroiled in their own internal conflicts. Maybe, just maybe, they were really, really, really weak, as demonstrated by how quickly they fell. The regime crumbled almost overnight. And we hope that all of Hashem's enemies will thus fall. All of our people's enemies will thus fall. And hopefully we'll have good news and only good news very soon. But we have business to take care of. It's the Parsha Podcast from the gleaming studios in the new Torch Center in Houston, Texas. Parsha Podcast live on torchzoom.com Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Central. That's 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. For our many friends in Denver, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. It's like 1 in the afternoon in Australia. 11 a.m. Wednesday in Tokyo. We have 5 weeks left to this experiment. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. I'm leaning towards continuing it. What do you think? RabbiWolbe@gmail.com. I want to apologize before we begin for a comment that I made last week. I was so excited to have finally caught up to all my emails after, having a bulging inbox for a long time. I got to inbox 0. And last week on the podcast, I invited and solicited new correspondence to RabbiWolbe@gmail.com. And I said, that's it. I'm like a email ninja playing whack-a-mole with all the new emails. But I thought it was really inappropriate to call responding to emails whack-a-mole, because this is not a nuisance. Quite the contrary. I cherish the emails you send me. I'm honored and humbled that you would take the time out to reach out. So I hereby publicly retract what I said last week. I disavow it. I welcome your emails. I cherish them. Really, I should print them out and have them framed and displayed proudly in the Torch Center studios. It's not whack-a-mole. It's something that I delight over and cherish. And I will now amend what I wanted to say. I hope to respond to your correspondence with the proper weight and gravity and respect and consideration and alacrity that they are due. RabbiWolbe@gmail.com. It's Parshas Vayishlach. Jacob had endured 20 years of living with Laban, the wiliest charlatan trickster of all time. And he emerged with his family, with his 4 wives, with his 11 sons and his daughter, he emerged unscathed, both physically and spiritually. But there is no rest for the weary. He's on to the next task, encountering his vengeful twin, Esau. When we last left off with Esau, Jacob had usurped the blessings intended for Esau, and Esau committed himself to murder Jacob. Chapter 27, verse 41, he did not want to do it in his father's lifetime. Esau said in his heart, when my father dies, I'm going to kill Jacob. Rebekah knew this prophetically, so she instructed Jacob to flee, go escape until the rage of Esau subsides, and then I'll send you a note, I'll send you a postcard when it is safe to return. And then she tells Isaac that I don't want Jacob to marry a local Canaanite woman. Let's send him to go marry one of my nieces, one of my brother Laban's daughters. That was the pretext to send him away. Really, she wanted him away because Esau was plotting to murder him. Now, this was 34 years ago, 34 years prior to the events of our Parsha. Jacob had spent 14 years in the academy studying, and then 14 years for the rights to marry Rachel and Leah, and then 6 years he married for pay, the speckled ones, the spotted ones, and so on, with Laban altering the terms 100 times. So it's been 34 years. And now he's heading back. He finished with one crisis. He's moving on to the other. And he sends some feelers, some messengers. Go, let's find out what's happening with Esau. How is he doing after 34 years? And then come back. We got some news. He's heading your way at the helm of an army of 400 warriors. His rage is still at a fever pitch. So Jacob prepares. First, we'll do an appeasement, a big bribe, prayer, and prepare for war. And he first encounters the angel of Esau, and they have a long nocturnal struggle, and it's a stalemate, and the angel dislodges his hip bone, and he blesses him by renaming him Israel. Finally, he encounters Esau, and he arranges the camp in the proper configuration. He bows 7 times, and is able to avoid catastrophe. Rashi cites our sages. Jacob had to tiptoe between 2 mad, hungry lions. On one hand, he had Laban. On the other hand, he had Esau, and he emerged safely. But it's not over. The troubles continue. Dinah is abducted. She's assaulted by Shechem, the heir of the city of Shechem. And Shimon and Levi, her brothers, they absolutely savage the whole city. They deceive them. They lull them into complacency. We're going to offer you a rapor shma. Just circumcise. Join us. They circumcise. They're weak. Betachbulos ta'asem melchama. With deception, you do war. This is the greatest deception of all. And they slaughter the whole city. And they were rebuked for their behavior. We have the death of Rachel. We have the birth of Benjamin. We have Reuben's sin. He jumbles the bed. After Rachel died, Jacob established his permanent bed with Bilhah. Reuben thought that was an insult. He moved the beds around. Finally, Jacob has his reunion with Isaac. Isaac passes, and the Parsha ends with the delineation of Esau's empire, a line of chieftains and tribal leaders. But when you read the story and you map out the genealogy, it is also a litany of illegitimacy. Let's dig into the Parsha a bit deeper. And we'll start from the very beginning. The Torah, the word Torah, as we know, means instruction. The Torah is instructive. We're supposed to learn from what we read. The stories, the people, the narratives, the events, it's supposed to be instructive. And we're supposed to learn not just from the righteous, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, these righteous women, the tribes, Joseph. We're supposed to learn from everyone. Who is the wise one? the Mishnah tells us, he who learns from every person, the good people and the bad people, the intelligent and the feeble-minded, the righteous and the wicked. The verse tells us about Solomon, Vayechkam mikol adam, he became wise from every person. Our sages tell us he became wise even from the imbeciles. Everyone he met, he would learn, he would study, and he would glean wisdom. Today, we're going to learn some lessons from very unexpected places, from very unexpected people. We can learn from everyone, but we'll start with a lesson from Jacob. Jacob is successful in his 20 years with Laban. Now it's time to meet Esau. He sends messengers. And he gives them an instruction. What are you supposed to tell Esau? Ko tomrun, so shall you speak to my master Esau. Tell him, so said your servant Jacob. Jacob is very deferential to Esau. You're the master, I'm the servant. And he gives him a little overview. I lived with Laban, and that's why I tarried until now. And he starts to list, I have a lot of animals and so on, and I want to find favor in your eyes. He is sweet-talking him. He's wooing him. There's a very famous comment in Rashi here. The most famous comment in Rashi in our Parsha. Jacob instructs the messengers to tell Esau, Im Laban garti, I have lived with Laban. I've lived with Laban. The word garti, I've lived, it's the same letters as the word or the spelling of taryag. We know there's a system of gematria. Every Hebrew letter has an equivalent number. And there are 613 mitzvos in the Torah, our sages tell us. And the gematria letters for 613 is Taf Resh Yud Gimel, which is 400 plus 200 plus 10 plus 3, Taryag. And Rashi observes that the word Garti, Gimel Resh, Taf Yud, it's the same letters as Taryag. You just scramble the letters and you have Taryag. So Rashi tells us that there is a subtext in what Jacob is telling Esau, I have lived with Laban, but the word that he chooses is a word that can also be jumbled as Taryag. I have lived, but I observed 613 mitzvos. Even though I was with bad company, I was with Laban, the trickster, the fraudster, the corrupt one, I maintained my fidelity to God Almighty, to His Torah, and to His 613 mitzvos, and I have not learned from Laban's evil ways. This is the message, or part of the message Rashi tells us, that Jacob is sending to Esau. So first of all, there's something remarkable. Laban is one of the biggest villains in the Torah. Every year on the Passover Seder, we say that Laban was worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh only wanted to kill the boys, but Laban wanted to destroy everything. And Jacob is testifying here that although he spent 20 years together with Laban, I didn't learn from him. I wasn't influenced by him. I maintained my complete and total fidelity to God. How did Jacob do it? How did Jacob succeed in not falling prey to Laban? How did he avoid that hungry lion that wanted to pounce upon him? So I heard an idea from my grandfather. It's a very powerful idea, maybe a bit controversial, a bit uncomfortable, shall we say. The word garti, I have lived, is from the root of the word ger, which means a visitor, not a permanent resident. When Abraham was trying to buy a burial spot for his wife, he said, Ger v'toshav. I'm like a visiting, traveling tourist. Toshav, a permanent resident. Meaning, you could treat me either way. As someone who's just passing by, a transient person who's just coming through, or someone who lives here on a more permanent basis. Jacob uses the word garti, which means I have lived here on a temporary plane as a visitor. So my grandfather, must remember, used to, when he spoke about this Rashi, he would highlight the idea that Jacob, when he spent 20 years with Laban, he was like a newcomer. He was like traveling through. You know, like when you go to a hotel and they have shelves and cabinets and drawers. And I'm only here for the night. I'm leaving for the 5 a.m. flight. You don't put your clothing in, right? You don't unpack, right? Because you're only there for a few hours. You're there for the night, right? But if you're staying for a week in a resort, you're traveling on vacation, well, then you unpack and you settle down. Jacob is saying, I traveled here. I'm here for a mission. I'm here temporarily. I'm here with my intention to go back. I'm not unpacking. I'm just passing through. I'm just a visitor. For 20 years, Jacob was a visitor. You always wonder. I always wonder. Maybe you don't wonder about these things. If someone like rents a place for 6 months or a year, it's such a hassle to switch the mailing address and all your different accounts. You're only there for a year. But if you move in, you're there for 20 years. Like you're settling in, right? Jacob did not acclimate. He didn't acculturate. He was, for 20 years, just a visitor. You recall perhaps at the end of last week's Parsha, after there was the standoff between Jacob and Laban, they build a monument. This is the DMZ between your camp and my camp. And they both name the monument. And Jacob calls it Gal Eid, which means like a pyramid of testimony. And Laban calls it Yidar Sahadusa, which means a pyramid of testimony in Aramaic. Rashi points out, like the Torah is telling us that Laban had his name for this pile of stones, and Jacob has his name. It's the same name, just one's in Hebrew and one's in Aramaic. And I think perhaps the significance of that is to show that even though the lingua franca of the people there was Aramaic, Jacob was still speaking Hebrew. 20 years later, he didn't change. He didn't adopt. He didn't acculturate. He didn't assimilate. He didn't get absorbed into the melting pot of Haran, of Laban's hometown. He was a visitor. He was a traveler. He was transient. And that's how he survived. I mentioned this in the past. This past week's Parsha. Parsha's Vayetze. It's one of the longest Parshas in the Torah. 148 verses. And there isn't a single paragraph break. On average, every 8 or 9 verses in the Torah, there is a break. A paragraph break in the Torah scroll. Accordingly, if Parsha's Vayetze was like every other Parsha, it should have 17 paragraph breaks. And it has exactly 0. And I speculated that this indicates the frame of mind of Jacob. He's here, he's passing through, and he's not losing his vigilance to realize that he's here, and it's dangerous, and he's on a mission, and he's not going to yield or bend. He's here as a visitor, he's here temporarily, and he's not going to get acculturated. And when my grandfather spoke about this subject, he used to tell personal stories. For 8 years during the war, he was in Sweden, in Stockholm. And he said that this place, it was a melting pot. People came there and they got sucked into the vortex. And the rates of assimilation of Jews who came to Sweden was through the roof. And he used to talk about how during the winter solstice, longest night of the year, it was like a universal custom in Sweden. all the men, all the women, all the children, they would roast a pig on a spit, and everyone would dance, and they would sing like lullabies around this spectacle. And it sounds like it's some sort of custom that they had. And he said, I didn't participate in it because I was worried. I don't want to get acculturated to the Swedish life, to the foreign life that I'm here. Maybe it's harmless, but it's part of the foreign culture. And Jacob was determined. I'm here. I'm with Laban. I'm in Haran, but I'm a visitor. I'm avoiding getting sucked in. And I think there's a larger lesson here. All of us, we have to contend. We live in the real world, right? On one hand, we're Jewish and we're committed to the Almighty and studying Torah and so on. But you have another foot in the big bad world. So there's a lesson to maintain a degree of Jacob's vigilance to not get drawn into that culture. But I think even more broadly, our soul is a visitor. It comes from a very different world. And the Midrash tells us that every second the soul is here, it wants to escape because it belongs elsewhere. It belongs in heaven. And every time you breathe out, the Almighty has to make sure the soul doesn't escape. Why? Because you breathe out, the soul's like, okay, here's my opportunity. I want to bolt. But of course, we're very comfortable on terra firma. The idea of being in heaven, that what happens after we die, that's terrifying for us. But really, it's the opposite. Our soul is a traveler. And the tension is that, our body knows nothing aside from this world. And we have to choose, are we permanent here or are we only traveling through? Are we citizens or are we on a tourist visa? And there's a lesson here from Jacob, what to do when we're condemned to be in a culture in surroundings that may threaten our standing. Jacob was with Laban. We are all with Laban's on some degree or another. And Jacob Garti says to Esau, I lived here. I'm just passing by. I'm a tourist. I did not get acculturated and I maintained my standing. A week or two ago, there was Thanksgiving. This is not a religious holiday. And it's an undeniably laudable sentiment to be thankful and such a wonderful quality. Turkey is kosher. Pie is delicious. Football is exciting. To celebrate Thanksgiving or not. So in our community, it's about 50-50. On one hand, there's nothing wrong with it. Maybe it's even a good thing to spend a whole day thinking about the things that we're appreciative of. On the other hand, we're Jews. And this is part of American culture, but our home's in Israel. Yes, we're Americans, and yes, we're participants of this world, but we can't forget that really we shouldn't be here. And even if it's not something which is problematic per se, it's acculturation, and maybe you should avoid it. So I would say it's about 50-50 in our community to celebrate it or not. And we underestimate how seductive the general culture is. You could become entangled in the culture, in the society, in the arts, in the language, in the education, and what happens to your identity. So there are groups that I'm familiar with who make a concerted effort to remain distinct. You've seen them. The Hasidic Jews, the primary language that they speak to their children is Yiddish. And they dress the way Polish noblemen dressed in the 1700s. And it looks highly anachronistic, completely out of place. And we may look at them and say, what's happening over here? This is by design. This is the intent, to avoid acculturation. Now, our family doesn't have this custom. And when I wanted to study in some of the great yeshivos and some of the greatest lectures in Talmud in the world, I had to teach myself Yiddish. Because even though my parents spoke to me in Hebrew, no Yiddish. And even today, I still remember some Yiddish. It's a bit rusty, but I did have a very dramatic Yiddish language dream a few weeks ago, and I was so excited when I woke up. I said, I still got it. I still got it. But this is the question people have to make, or the decisions they have to make. If you want to maintain and perpetuate your values, and you're in a society that doesn't necessarily embrace those values, there is danger. That's what Jacob faced, and he said, I'm not buying in at all. My parents, we had secular literature in our house. We get some magazines like news, politics, stuff like that. We had radio, listened to WFAN, politics. We went to the baseball games, Shea Stadium. It's been torn down. So they didn't have a television, and they didn't send us to a secular university, but there was a certain balance that they struck. And I think that this maybe it's a bit controversial, because some may argue that, well, if you're part of society, you should embrace it. But Jacob is demonstrating to us that if you're in an environment that may threaten your ability to go home, or that may threaten your ability to preserve your lofty spiritual standing, it's smart to stay a tourist on some level, to not settle down and acculturate. That's the lesson from Jacob. But let's take a lesson from someone very, very different. The same Rashi says that Jacob is sending a message to Esau. I have lived with Laban, but I kept 613 mitzvos. And I did not learn from any of his bad behavior. Jacob is testifying about himself. I kept 630 mitzvos, even though I was far away. And I did not emulate, mimic, copy, learn from the behavior of Laban. Now, if you read this Rashi, you might not necessarily pick up the apparent redundancy here. Jacob is touting to Esau his righteousness. I was with Laban. I lived there for 20 years, but I stayed righteous. I didn't buy into his sinful ways. I kept 613 mitzvos. We don't see necessarily the redundancy, but the commentaries point out, wait a minute. Why is he saying something which is apparently superfluous? If you keep 630 mitzvos, certainly you're not studying from Laban's behavior. We were always trained in the yeshiva that every word, even in Rashi, is calculated and precise. And it seems like it's a bit wordy. I kept 613 and I didn't copy Laban's ways. Rashi is not paid by the word. If there's something he could have said with fewer words, he would use fewer words. Why doesn't Rashi just say, well, I lived with Laban and I kept 613, and we will certainly know that I did not mimic and learn from his bad ways? That's the question that the commentaries asked. And maybe it's not such a sharp question, doesn't bother us necessarily so much. But listen to this idea. And I saw this in a few different places. I saw a quote from the Chafetz Chaim and amongst other sources as well. Jacob is lamenting the fact that he did not learn from Laban's ways. Yes, I observed the mitzvos, but alas, I didn't learn from Laban how to be completely committed to my craft. Jacob's lamenting the fact that he did not study from Laban, because Laban has a lot to teach us. Laban was a fraudster, trickster, charlatan, snake oil salesman, embezzler, defrauder. And he was so tenacious and so determined to steal, to cheat, to lie, to embezzle, and to defraud. 100 times he changes the terms of the deal. And whatever he does, the Almighty makes it. It's speckled, it's spotted, it's ringed, it's striped. No matter what he does, the Almighty made sure that Jacob gets his due. But Laban doesn't quit. He just again and again and again. Think about the determination, the conviction, the commitment, the dedication of Laban. He wasn't just a fly-by-night crook. He was diligent and determined and resilient and persistent in his crooked behavior. So Jacob is lamenting the fact that while he did indeed observe the 613, I failed to take the lesson from Laban of how determined I ought to be. I should have learned from Laban how to execute my mission. I should have emulated Laban's determination in how I do my mission. Laban is someone to learn from, not what to do, but how to do what you are doing. We read Laban's story in detail, and it's uninterrupted. It's certainly, if you read it with the commentaries, it's an uninterrupted story of corruption. When Jacob arrives, he starts to hug him and to kiss him, and he's touching him. Rashi tells us to feel, where's the gold? Where is he hiding all the valuables and treasures? From day one, your nephew shows up, and he's trying to fleece him. And then there's the long con. Jacob says, I'll work for you for 7 years for the rights to marry Rachel, your daughter, the younger one. There's no ambiguity. There's no room for misunderstanding here. And he works for 7 years. And Laban shamelessly replaces Rachel with Leah. Think about the chutzpah, the gall, the gumption you need to pull that off. Think about how unrepentant and shameless of a crook you need to be. And he says, oh, okay, no big deal. You can just marry Rachel as well. Just 7 more years. And after 14 years, 6 years for pay, he changes the terms 100 times. He's unbending in his determination to take advantage of Jacob. He leaves no stone unturned in his pursuit of defrauding his son-in-law. And my favorite example is when Jacob escapes and Laban pursues and they have that standoff. Chapter 31, verse 36. And Laban goes through all of Jacob's stuff to try to find anything that's his, finds absolutely nothing. Jacob unloads on Laban. And he says, what did I do? What's my sin? Why are you chasing me? You looked through all my stuff. Did you find a single thing that's yours? Put it out here in front of everyone who's watching. Show me what I stole from you. And he starts to delineate all the things that Jacob did for 20 years. For 20 years, he details his work and his ethic. He says, your animals never miscarried. I never touched anything that was not mine. If an animal died by accident or something like that, I covered it. If it was stolen by day or by night, it was on my account. I worked for you for 14 years for your daughters, 6 years for pay. You switched the terms of our agreement 100 times. And if not for God protecting me, I would have left with nothing. I would have left here with nothing. He lays out his case. And it's a scathing indictment of Laban's mistreatment of him. And it's logical, and it's organized, and it's cogent. And then Laban responds, verse 43. Vaya'an Lavan. Laban responded, Vayomer, and he said to Jacob, Habanos, Benosai. The daughters, the girls, the females, they're mine. Vahabanim, and the sons, they're mine, they're my sons. Vahatzon Tzoni, and the flock is my flock. V'chol asher atara, everything you see, lihu. It's mine. He doesn't respond to any of the arguments. He doesn't take into account any of the substance of what Jacob says. He's completely unmoved by anything that Jacob laid out in his case. Totally delusional. He's going to try to rob and steal and fleece Jacob. And when Jacob points out that he earned every penny and he lays out the mistreatment, he just says, no, it's mine. The flock is mine. The sons, the daughters, everything is mine. His corruption is so complete, nothing moves him, nothing destabilizes his corruption. And this is what Jacob said, I wish I learned that. Yes, I kept all 613, but alas, I didn't learn from Laban the degree of commitment that I should have to my craft. I should have the same degree that he has to his craft, I should have to mine. The exploits of Laban are told at length in the Torah. And although this is apparently the last we hear of him, did you know that his grandson makes a very prominent appearance in the Torah? Laban had a son named Beor. Beor had a son named Bilam, the sorcerer, the prophet who was commissioned to go curse the Jewish people. And there's a whole Parsha, Parshas Balak, Book of Numbers, spoiler alert, where his story is told in detail. And just as Laban is given enormous airtime in the Torah, Bilam is given the same. And if you read their stories, they're like mirror images of each other. Just as determined Laban was in his pursuit of stealing from Jacob, of uprooting everything, Bilam was Labanesque in his determination to curse the Jewish people. And he failed, and he persisted, and he failed, and he persisted, and he failed, and he persisted again and again and again and again. God says, don't go with him. Oh, let's try again. He goes with him, and then there's the talking, dunking. He meets the angel brandishing the sword. Nothing stops him. And he goes to this mountain and 7 altars and all the different animals, and that doesn't work. He was forced to bless him again and again and again. He's so dedicated to his craft. And his story is told in detail as well. And we have to learn from everyone. You want to be wise. You have to learn from everyone. We have to learn from Laban and from Bilam what type of enthusiasm we should have for our craft. Bilam woke up early. He saddled his own donkey. Rashi points out that he had the same degree of commitment as Abraham did. When Abraham prayed for Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, maybe there's 50 righteous people we could save the cities. Maybe there's 45, maybe there's 40, maybe there's 30, maybe there's 20, maybe there's 10. He left no stone unturned. Bilam's the same thing. Let's try from this mountain, from this angle, from this perspective. He had unparalleled determination and resilience in evil. And this is an exemplary portrait of dedication and determination. If he can be so committed, so devoted to his craft, we should learn to copy that, to mimic his enthusiasm, Laban and Bilam's enthusiasm, and relentless determination for good. Let us get into our things, be as committed and determined and dedicated in our things, in our agenda, as our enemies are in theirs. And I was thinking just the many areas that I feel like I'm guilty of this. So I mentioned earlier, went to Shea Stadium. I remember when I went to watch the Mets play, it was like in 1998. And my parents got tickets to the Mets game. And I was excited, looking forward to it for like 2 weeks. Okay, that's great. But is there anything in Jacob's agenda that I have 2 weeks of anticipation for? I read a story about a guy who was in a coma, or they put him into a medically induced coma during a soccer game, football for the international friends. And he had a surgery, and it was a big game, apparently. Premier League or something like that. And someone was privy to this. And they said that as he woke up from his coma, who won? What's the score? What happened in the game? There was a degree of interest that kind of transcended his circumstance and his, he's in the hospital. No, but that kind of floats to the top. And this person who witnessed that is like, wouldn't it be amazing if in our Torah study, in our prayer, in our kindness, and our efforts to improve ourselves, we were as committed as as they are? I'll tell you something. I might have mentioned this in a podcast sometime in the past. I read something that made me very upset. Not upset, but maybe felt a bit guilty. You may have heard there was an election recently in the United States. But before there was an election in the United States, there was an election for who's going to be the candidate. Primaries. And in the Republican primary, there was a governor from Florida, as they say in Florida. We say Florida, because I grew up in New York. There was a governor who was vying for the Republican ticket in the 2024 election. And his strategy was to invest a lot in Iowa. Iowa is the first caucus. You win Iowa, get some momentum, and maybe you'll win the primaries. So I remember reading that their strategy was that they were going to knock on the door of every single Republican voter in the state of Iowa a minimum of 4 times. A massive ground campaign to speak to people one-on-one, and they're going to knock on every single Republican voter, caucus goer's door a minimum of 4 times. And I read that, I said, are we doing anything like this for our brothers and sisters in our outreach to our brothers and sisters, they're Jews in America who don't even know they're Jewish, don't know what that means, never said the Shema once in their life, who don't know that Hashem loves them, who don't know that they're part of this incredible enterprise and legacy? Like, we should be knocking on every Jew in America's door at least 4 times. And it got me feeling bad until I spoke to someone in the summer. He's like, no, you don't understand. If some guy knocks on my door, like he's some sort of missionary, it's going to turn me off. This was someone who himself became religious, became Torah observant later in life. He says, no, that would turn me off. So it says, oh, it made me feel so good. Now I don't feel guilty about it. But on a conceptual level, we see people are so dedicated to things which really ultimately don't necessarily matter so much. Are we as dedicated in our agenda as they are? Okay, another controversial thing. Sorry, it's controversy time. It's controversy week here at the Torch Center. I once saw a video of Rabbi Weinberg, of blessed memory, in Auschwitz. And he was telling his students who were with him, he said, the Nazis, okay, the accursed Nazis, they had a list of every Jew in every neighborhood in Europe, and then every Jew in America and South America. And they were relentless, and they had the trains, and they had everything was so organized and so determined, so efficient. We have to be as committed as they are, or they were, in our efforts to enliven and embolden and awaken the Jewish spirit. We're trying to save Jews, trying to uplift the Jewish people. We have to have their degree of determination. Now, to say that we should emulate the Nazis, that's not a very, it's not a thing you're likely to hear from a great rabbi. But when studying this idea, we have to learn from Laban. We'll get to Esau in a second. We have to learn from Bilam. The Torah tells us their whole story. Why? Why do you have to read all about what happened with Bilam? If you want to be wise, you learn from everyone. Even evil villains. Why? Because they sometimes have a degree of determination and commitment that we should emulate. There's a rabbi in Houston, very serious scholar. And he studies a lot. He's always there. He's there till 1 a.m. He's there from 6 a.m. He's very dedicated, very committed, very diligent. And he has a rule. I have to do 4 pages of Talmud every day, which may not sound like a lot, but it's a lot. It's a ton. And he's like, I don't eat a morsel of food until I finish that. So if I don't finish it by 5, I'm not going to touch a bit of food until I have that, the 4-hour regimen covered. And I heard that he was once in a meeting with a businessman. And the businessman said, he's like, how are you so successful in business? He says, you don't understand. Until I make a certain amount of calls, until I do some deals, some sort of advancement in business, I don't eat food. So if you're hungry, grumbling, that's going to force you to pound the pavement to make the calls and do the cold calls. If this guy could do it for his business, my business, what's my business? Study Torah. I'm going to do the same thing. A lesson from a surprising source. In our Parsha, we read about how there was a man named Shechem who was the heir of the city of Shechem. And he wanted to marry Dinah. And the brothers of Dinah said, listen, we have some terms. We're not going to give our daughter to an uncircumcised person. Got to circumcise. Not just you, everyone. And what did he do? He's like, I'm circumcising today. And everyone else, I'm going to persuade everyone to circumcise today. We're not going to sleep on it. I'll take some time to consider. I don't know. We'll talk it over, chew it over with our advisors. He throws all caution to the wind. That's the depth of his desire to marry Dinah. There's determination, a lot of determination in the villains of our Parsha. If we were as committed in our pursuits as they were in theirs, we would be unstoppable. Okay, 2 more controversial statements. My dear departed friend, David Jenikov, used to say, Jews are terrible at marketing. Just the worst. And we should take a page out of some of the other religions. So I had a debate with someone, one of my friends here. And he sent me a little screenshot. There is an organization or like a movement called Thank You Hashem, which is all about trying to make Judaism fun. Make it fun, okay? That's the idea. Make Judaism fun. So lots of music and all these fun initiatives to make our relationship with the Almighty fun. So my friend sent me a screenshot of like their frequently asked questions. And one of the questions is the slogan. Where do these slogans come from? And the answer is that, this is a quote. I started this because I couldn't understand why there's so much positivity and all of this chizuk, which means encouragement, about how much Hashem loves us in every other religion besides for ours. How come everyone else has all this positivity and we don't? By the Christians, they say Yashka loves them. So how come we don't stress that in Judaism? So my friend was sending this to me as a criticism, but I don't think he's correct. Yes, if other religions have enthusiasm, we should match it. We should at least match it. We should exceed it. And I heard from a great rabbi who said, we should be as dedicated in our craft as the Muslims want to blow themselves up to give up their whole life for their delusion, for their evil, just to kill some Jews. We have to have self-sacrifice as well. Solomon taught us we need to learn from every person. There's a lot of bad people in our parsha. Shechem, Laban. We'll get to Esau in a second. There's all sorts of lessons that we're supposed to glean from these people. And the final lesson comes from the Academy of Esau. Esau University. If we know anything about Esau, is that he had legendary, volcanic rage. His brother pulled a fast one, stole the blessings, usurped the blessings, and he wanted to kill his brother. And there's no hyperbole, there's no exaggeration. He planned on killing Jacob. He made that plan in Parshas Toldos, in the aftermath of the theft of the usurpation of the blessings. It's 34 years later, and his rage has not subsided. He still wants to kill Jacob. Why didn't he kill him right away? Right away, Jacob steals the blessings. Kill him right away. So the verse tells us, Vayomer Esav bilibo. Esav said in his heart, let my father die. I don't want him to witness this. I don't want to cause him any pain. Then I'll kill my brother, Jacob. Esau is no hero. But you know what he demonstrates? He demonstrates superlative self-control. He had anger that did not subside for 34 years. 34 years ago was 1990, okay, before the internet. Michael Jordan had yet to win a single title. This is during George H.W. Bush's presidency. Something happened that long ago, and he still was so hopping mad about it that his anger still propelled him now to murder his brother. But he controlled it. He controlled it. And the Talmud tells us that the pauper and the rich man and the wicked man are all going to go before God in judgment. And the pauper is going to say, well, I didn't study Torah. I couldn't do mitzvahs. I was so poor. I was so destitute. How can I possibly have time to study Torah? And that may be a good argument if a man named Hillel never existed. Because the heavenly court will tell this person, were you poorer than, more impoverished than Hillel? And it gives a whole story about how poor Hillel was. And he still studied Torah. And the rich person will say, I was so rich, I'm so busy, I had to manage my affairs and all my businesses. I had no time to study Torah, to do mitzvos. And they're going to say, that's great, but there's a man named Rabbi Elazar ben Charsom, and he was incredibly wealthy. It gives a whole story about how wealthy he was. Were you wealthier than him? Well, he studied Torah. He was successful in his spiritual agenda. Your excuse is eliminated. And then there's the wicked person. This guy, he's so handsome. He's a stud. He was so beautiful, he couldn't help himself from sinning. The temptations were just too much. And they'll say, that's great if a man named Joseph never existed. You weren't more handsome than Joseph. You didn't have temptations of Joseph, and he still managed to overcome his yetzer hara. So Talmud concludes, this is the book of Yoma on page 35b. Hillel will obligate the poor, and Rabbi Elazar ben Charsom will obligate the rich, and Joseph will obligate the handsome devils who became sinners. So one of the great rabbis said, and what about the hot-tempered? What about the angry people? The people just can't control themselves. And they just behave in such terrible ways in their rage. One of the great sages says, well, Esau will obligate them. He was able to bottle up his volcanic rage that didn't subside for 34 years. That's how angry he was. And he controlled it. He didn't want to upset his father. If he was able to control his volcanic anger, you can control yours. It's a lesson from a very unusual place. We're students of the University of Laban and the Esau Academy. The Torah spends a lot of time telling us the narratives, the stories, the events and exploits of these villains. And the wise men train themselves to learn from everyone, even from our enemies. Some ideas in the Parsha. Let's get to the dilemma of the Parsha. You're a parent, and the kid does something really wrong. What to do? How to react? Shimon and Levi, they slaughter an entire city. The perpetrators of the crime against their sister Dinah, apparently innocent bystanders. Now, the Rambam has a whole piece where he explains what their rationale was. They had their justification. But Jacob disagreed with them. And he was disappointed in them. And how does he react? And this is a translation. He says, you brought me trouble. You made me odious among the inhabitants of the land. This is like fairly mild dissatisfaction that Jacob is expressing. And that's apparently it, right? Well, no. You fast forward to the end of Genesis. It's almost 50 years later. Jacob's on his deathbed. And he unloads on Shimon and Levi. Ar apam ti az. Accursed is their anger, for it is fierce. And he punishes them. It's very interesting to see how Jacob navigates his dilemma. Kid behaves inappropriately, severely inappropriately. And it seems like he lets it slide. He's like, he made me upset. Which is, he is expressing mild dissatisfaction at the time. But the criticism that maybe their behavior warranted doesn't show up. And it doesn't show up. And then 50 years later, Jacob is on his deathbed, and then he tells them that their behavior was completely inappropriate, and their anger is accursed, and they stole the craft from Esau, and he curses them, or it appears that he curses them. I will scatter them amongst Israel, and I'll spread them out amongst the nation. I think it's a bit of a pattern with Jacob, where he doesn't react very strongly at the time, but he saves it, he files it away, and later on, when it's long forgotten even, 50 years later, who remembers the events of 50 years ago? Or maybe you do, I don't know. That's a long time ago. It's even longer than 34 years. There's a file in the appropriate time. It surfaces. I think it's maybe a bit counterintuitive to see how he navigated this dilemma. But I was thinking, I have a little anecdote I want to share. I think it's actually much more effective if you have criticism that you think is beneficial for someone to hear, but it comes out later. Here's a little anecdote. So the 7th grade class from 1999 in a school, in a Jewish school in Toronto, which my wife is from, but that may or may not have to do with the story. So apparently they had a teacher that they mistreated. They were mean to her, or they were disrespectful. I don't know, I wasn't there. But someone reached out to the teacher and said, I want to apologize. It wasn't nice. And the teacher responded, it really wasn't nice. Now, this is going back to 25 years ago. So the class got together and wrote this letter, addressed it to Mrs. So-and-so. She was Miss So-and-so at the time, but she's now Mrs. So-and-so. She might be a grandmother, who knows? It's a long time ago. And they wrote, and I have the text of the letter here. You taught our class back in Eitz Chaim, that's the name of the school, Eitz Chaim, Tree of Life. In 1999, we were in grade 7. The Canadians say not 7th grade, grade 7. As we reflect on memories from our elementary school years, many, if not most of us, feel tremendous guilt regarding how we behaved in your class. And we wholeheartedly extend this letter to you as a gesture of apology for the lack of derech eretz, of proper decorum, the audacity and the anguish we showed to you that year. While we were young, most of us were already 12, and the responsibility for our behavior is upon us. And we breached the line, and it wasn't considered normal behavior for junior high girls. And the disregard that we showed to you was shameful, and we feel bad about it, and it caused you pain and embarrassment, and we come forward here to ask you for forgiveness. Yours sincerely, and they signed, all the students from that year signed their names. And it was even a student who was no longer with us, unfortunately, tragically passed away young. To me, it's like the story that I heard, to me, like this is like powerful. 25 years later, to acknowledge what you did, it was inappropriate, and to apologize for it. Then if they had an apology, like if they were forced to make an apology that day, it would just be something that would be one and done. But when there's a long break and then it's resurfaced, I think then it really lands with some oomph, and it's much more impactful. There's a dilemma. What do you do when the kid misbehaves or when there's some criticism that's very appropriate? Jacob's way is to wait. Even 50 years. Not to forget about it. Not to delete it. Maybe make a mild expression of dissatisfaction at the time. But the criticism, the full criticism, it's much more impactful and useful. It makes a bigger impression when it is given after some time has elapsed. That was the dilemma, an idea, something to chew over. Maybe it will help us in our lives. But this is it. This is the end of the Parsha Podcast. Parsha Podcast live on torchzoom.com Tuesdays at 8 Central, 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. I appreciate your time, your attention. This was a delight. A bit controversial, but that's okay, right? It's December. We can have some fun here. We're trying to learn. We're trying to grow together. That's okay. If it was too controversial, send me an email, rabbi@wolbejim.com. If it was just the right amount of controversy, well, then I'd appreciate an email as well. Have a wonderful day, a terrific rest of your week, and please God, an elevated experience this upcoming Shabbos. And please God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week.